I have followed you guys since since the first show, Rocky Mountain Audio Festival.
Exactly.
And I definitely get, the Ryan sound.
Sure.
And one of the things that impressed me is the fact that you guys are designing your own drivers.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is the advantage to that, right? What's the advantage of doing it yourself?
It's a long, complicated process, so we don't undertake it lightly. A
Yeah.
lot of other people just go buy drivers from one of the European driver companies, or they buy drivers from somebody like Parts Express or something, who develop their own drivers. But for us to achieve the level of resolution that we want out of the speaker and keep the colorations as low as possible and reduce distortion, the only way to do that is to develop our own drivers. So it's a long, complicated process, and I every time we do a new speaker that requires a new driver, I don't undertake it lightly, because it means where somebody else could do a new speaker in a month if they wanted to. For us, doing a new speaker means probably 12 months of driver design, then cabinet, crossover, final voicing, et cetera, et cetera. So a new speaker for us is a very, very time-consuming process to get right.
Is one more important than the other? Crossover, driver?
No, we kind of look at speakers very holistically, or a speaker very holistically. So the drivers are a equal component to the crossover, to the cabinet, to everything about it. So we don't look at one piece of it as being any more important. The crossover design that's a unique skill. There's no way to teach somebody how to do that, because it requires, when you design a crossover, the one thing is the measurements.
Yeah.
And most people can, buy test equipment and get that right themselves. But the other side of it is the actual very minute adjustments that you make to get the overall tonality that you're looking for. That is, and when you listen to any of our speakers, there's a consistent sound to the speakers that it's a Ryan speaker.
Yeah.
And even historically, if you go back and listen to our speakers from the 1980s or 1990s, that overall tonality is consistent. And we have customers come in at shows like this and tell us, "Oh, I have a pair of your old speakers. These sound like they are definitely related to those." They're a modern interpretation of it, but they can hear that family consistency. I don't do it intentionally, but in my mind, when I hear stuff and when I adjust, do the final voicing of the speakers, I have a picture in my mind as to what they're supposed to sound like. And so that crossover design is really a key component of that. And it's just an integral part of the speaker, but it's really no more important than having good drivers, or having a good rigid enclosure, or having the enclosure tuned correctly in the case of a bass reflex cabinet.
Do the components matter in terms of a crossover? I mean, you see kind of two schools of thought, and you see a lot of manufacturers that might say, just throw any old resistor or capacitor in there and everything as well. Has it been your experience that even the capacitor that you're picking, the type of capacitor, does it make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So we listen to lots of capacitors, which seems like a crazy idea.
We're sitting around listening to these
Yeah, if you tell like a dyed-in-the-wool engineer that you're listening to capacitors or listening to resistors, they'll just walk away. Yeah, that's just way outside. And we've tried to develop measurements to be able to measure this, so that we could potentially find something even better, or develop something ourselves that was even better. But it just, at this moment in time, the ear is just more sensitive, or more sensitive to things that aren't measurable, or measurement hasn't been developed yet to be able to see those differences. But yes, we absolutely pick specific brands and models of capacitors to use in different areas of the speaker, based purely on their sound quality. Same thing with resistors, same thing with inductors. We listen to, probably, believe it or not, which is going to make us sound insane, we probably listened to 5 or 6 different brands of resistors.
Oh, wow.
Before we finally decided on the resistor that we wanted to use in the speakers.
It goes back to what you were just saying, that, it's like if you, as an example, art, and you take abstract, right?
Right.
Different people have different ways of what that painting would look like.
Sure.
But it is all abstract, right?
Right.
So that makes sense. It's like, by you going through and picking all of these different resistors and components, that it's your signature. It's like, that's...
Yeah, okay. And but to clarify that, it's not really what we're going for. Is something that sounds as accurate to the original recording as possible.
Okay.
So in my mind, what we're doing is picking components that have the least influence on the overall sound. It's not. There's lots of other people here who go the opposite direction and think that they need to add something to the original recording.
Yeah.
We go the extreme other direction and say, look, we are just a window to the music that you're listening to.
That's thank you for correcting that, because you know what, that makes sense. It's not like you guys arrive at what would be the original, what you would say is keeping the integrity of that, and hey, let's go off road for a little while,
right?
And kind of see,
right, exactly,
what we can do.
Right.
Yeah. So, you guys care about bracing. There's
absolutely
no doubt about that.
Any of our speakers, you pick them up, just look at the weights, go on the internet and look at the weights of the speakers. Every single one of the speakers weighs probably 2 to 3 times as much as their closest competitor.
When I got in the R610s, I couldn't do it, so my wife helped lug those. Sarah,
you might need to lift some weights. That speaker at 32 pounds or so, it's a pretty heroic enclosure. But having a quiet cabinet, when you reduce the distortion in the drivers, when you use good crossover components, and you design a crossover that brings a very smooth in-room frequency response. So overall, the distortion in the crossover, the distortion in the drivers, all the distortion components have been reduced.
Yeah.
The last thing to work on is the cabinet. The cabinet itself, due to resonance, can produce distortion as well, and that we want to try to minimize or eliminate as much as possible. So when you reduce everything else, it's just you need every single component to be low and working together to make this all come together.
Why go through all that hard work just to then have the resonance of the cabinet influence all that hard work?
It defeats the purpose, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Tweeter, other than the R610s, we'll use those as an example just to keep the conversation simple. Tweeter's offset.
Correct.
Right? And you don't see that in every single design.
No.
Are there...
There's technical reasons.
Technical reasons. So walk through that.
So a lot of other people don't do it because it's a lot of trouble, because you have to make left and right speakers.
Yeah.
Which means you have to inventory left and right speakers. And so typically speakers, the pairs are matched, most people. And so when you match a pair of speakers and you have a left and a right, you're really narrowing, or you're increasing your inventory, and you're narrowing down your ability to mix and match between multiple runs of speakers or multiple pairs of speakers or whatever. And so most people don't do it just from a purely logistic standpoint. Now, there's a sound technical reason why you do this. And the reason is that if you put the tweeter in the center of the enclosure, the distance from the center of the tweeter to the edge of the cabinet, at that distance, at that wavelength, there'll be a deviation in the frequency response, typically maybe a small peak and a dip. Yeah. To eliminate that, what you need to do is change the distance from move the tweeter offset, so that the distance from the center of the tweeter to the edge of the cabinet, left and right, is different.
Yeah.
And by doing that, it minimizes that peak and dip that's in the frequency response, and just makes the speaker overall measure smoother. Is this audible? Debatable. But from a purely technical standpoint, if you're trying to make the best speaker you can, it's the right way to do it.
It's the right way.
It's the problem is exacerbated on cabinets with square edges.
Yeah.
So if you put a very large radius, now we're talking a radius probably at least a 1-inch radius, that problem is minimized. But then you have to think about the aesthetics of the speaker. How does that work into the overall design, et cetera, et cetera. So in our case, we decided to make the R series speakers, the 610, 620, and 630, are more of a classic sort of British monitored look. And to optimize that as much as possible, it was necessary to offset the tweeter. There's only a few other people that offset tweeters. Yeah. One of them obviously being ProAct. They've done it for a very long time.
Following up with that question, diffraction. Let's talk. You guys always are throwing on, these
rings of felt. Yeah, lots of speakers have felt. Most people just don't notice it. I think because ours is the natural gray color, we don't go to the trouble to dye it. Most people.
It looks cool.
It gives the speaker. When you walk in and you see one of our speakers.
Yeah, right.
Wilson, Vandersteen, Rockport,
You see them.
all of
right.
them have some sort of absorptive material on the front baffle, whether it's the same grade of felt that we use or whatever, but they tend to dye them black or use black material or whatever. The grade of material that we use it's an acoustical grade of felt, and it is not available in black normally. So if you were to get it in black, you probably have to dye it, which then adds all sorts of other manufacturing issues.
In the most simplistic terms, we're dealing with diffraction at this point.
It's a little bit of diffraction control. It's a little bit of early reflection control as well. So tweeters, unlike woofers, have incredibly wide dispersion.
Right.
Our tweeter has incredibly wide dispersion on top of incredibly wide. So that felt on the front of the speaker really minimizes the early reflections off of the baffle, off of things like the screws, off of things like the woofer surround, off of the edge of the enclosure. All of those things are minimized by using that felt on the front baffle.
Wow.
So a lot of when people listen to our speakers, one of the first things people always say is wow, the sound staging is amazing.
Yeah.
The focus of the imaging is amazing. And part of that is because of that felt. Not the whole reason, but part of the reason is because of the felt. The felt really minimizes a lot of the diffraction that would occur that would call your attention to the front of the speaker because that's where the sound's emanating from, as opposed to being really focused on the center image or what have you. So
performance unfolding in front of you. Sure.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So
last question. When I reviewed the R610s, I was meshing up with tube gear.
Sure.
And while I'm certainly not biased to only tube gear, I think both definitely have their merits. There's no question about that. It was refreshing to see that you guys have, joined up with Mod Ride and done something a little bit different than what you guys have done in the past.
Right.
What led to that decision? And
I think that we both share kind of a common. The companies are similar. You know, we have kind of similar goals, and I think their overall sonic interpretation, picture, whatever you, matches well with our speakers. But the other thing is the shows go on, and from the first time that we met you until later shows, we've used 5 different brands of electronics. And one of the things that we're really trying to show people is our speakers are just easy to drive, good sounding speakers, and you can use whatever you want and get really good performance.
That's a good point.
And so it's Mod Ride's just yet another one of those brands that we think represents really good sound quality.
To finish up today, this was my brother's first experience at a show, and I didn't want to influence him at all. And it was cool because we walk around these rooms and we see this stuff that you see in magazines and giant speakers and crazy expensive. And what he walked away with after the very first day is like, just because it's expensive doesn't make it, something that connects with me, that I can connect with.
Right.
It's like, it's neat,
right.
And you're like, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
And without my influence, I mean, he's heard the R610s a million times and he loves them, but like he heard the Tempest and he's like, man, those things are like insanely good. I mean, it's just like, why would I spend so much more when I'm getting so much out of the, it's like...
It goes along with the philosophy that we've used on everything. The speakers, I mean, everybody wants to say this. We really try to make it real.
Yeah.
But, people really want their product to play above its weight.
Yeah.
We built a $2,000 speaker that we think probably competes with much more expensive products. Yeah. And no dealer in the world is going to sell a $2,000 speaker when they could sell or help a customer buy a $6,000 or $10,000 speaker. But we really want to give people that are buying our product something that they can grow with, and whether they change a cable or an amplifier or whatever, when they go home with that new product, whatever it is, and put it in their system, what we really want is that people hear that difference, good or bad or whatever. That part's not that important, but it's all part of this enjoyment of building up a music reproduction system and improving it as you go along and being able to hear those changes that you make. Because the worst thing is to have a speaker, which is kind of at the end of the chain and can have the biggest influence, to have a speaker that doesn't allow you to hear the changes that you made, or the difference between playing Spotify and playing Tidal, or whatever it is, right? And so you want to be able to provide a customer with a product that they can grow with for a long time. And that's kind of the sort of philosophy that we've taken with all the speakers. And it translates into the Tempest 3. So you can imagine, you know, we look at the Tempest 3 and think, okay, it's almost $16,000, which is horrific to Trevor and I. It's horrifically expensive.
Yeah.
And especially considering where we started building $350 speakers in the 1980s.
Yeah, you see that.
Oh yeah, it's like, wow, who's going to buy this? And granted, they're probably these days the average price of a high-end speaker at a show like this is $20,000, $30,000. I don't know. Never gone around with the calculator and figured it out. But the thing is, you know, we look at this, at what we're doing, and think that we're providing people with a speaker that probably does compete with something at easily double its price.
Yeah.
We've had most of the people that come through that are very astute listeners, industry people, come in and say, you guys should be charging at least double. And that's not why we got back into this. That's not why we do what we do. We want to really try to provide that value.
Yeah.
But your brother's right. There's a lot of stuff where you walk around, and no matter how, you would think, when you buy a more expensive car, you get more luxury, you get more speed, you get more this, you get more, and there's no two ways about it. You get in it, it goes faster, it's nicer, whatever.
Yeah.
Here, sometimes, regretfully, the more you spend, not necessarily the closer you get to your music, you know?
Yeah. Well, thanks.
You're welcome.
Man. I mean, I've said it from day one, and I mean it with all my heart that, you know, what you guys do is so meaningful to me, because you're right. You see these high ticket prices, and you have, you know, guys out there that watch New Record Day, and they're like, I can't spend $30,000 or $50,000 or $100,000, you know, and it's like, well, you don't have to.
Right.
You really don't.
Right.
You know. So thanks for chatting with us, man.
You're very welcome. Thanks for all your support, and
thanks
for everybody for watching Ron's videos and and going out and listening to the speakers. And make sure if you're ever at a show to come by and say hi to us, and bring your records.
What is your obsession with Justin Bieber, and how has it influenced your Todd?
Cut. Let's start over again.